Good afternoon in Festival Lampa in the citizens' discussion, the European Green Deal and economic recovery. We are very happy to have you in this Saturday afternoon. You can see this discussion in different platforms, and that is Facebook account of European Accounts Committee, Facebook account, also in Delphi portal. And we will be very happy to expect and have your questions during the discussion. You can ask in the European Commission representative Facebook account below the live streaming of this video. European Green Deal and European economic recovery after the crisis, digital challenges, how to create new workplaces and also become much more competitive, how all of this could influence and influences our choices, and these are the topics that we are going to talk about in this discussion. What is also important at the beginning of the discussion, I will say that at the beginning European Commission came up with the largest legislative legislation, that is a Green Deal, and that is a very large-scale plan how to change European economy reacting to the extraordinary condition in the climate changes, so that till 2050 Europe would become the first climate-neutral continent in the world. And after they adopting the budget of European Council, and also Latvia in the coming 7 years will be able to get more than 10 billion euros, and that is a very unique 27 countries agreement about the necessary investments in the strengthening of the country's economy. I'm very happy to announce the participants of this discussion, of us whom we're going to talk about tonight. We have the Executive Vice President of European Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis, who is joined us from Brussels in live streaming. So we have also the Regional Development Minister Pūce, the President of the Bank of Latvia, Kazāks, and also Latvian labor employers Confederation Liga Meņģelsone. Mr. Dombrovskis, could you tell us about the Green Deal of Europe and how topical this is during the COVID crisis, and what are the instruments that you are coordinating? Now, good evening. Now, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. And that is exactly that's one of the European priorities that was defined when the Commission started its work, was the so-called Green Deal of Europe. That means moving to climate neutrality in 2050. And at present, there are very many questions concerning COVID pandemics and economic crisis that has arisen as a result of that, and how it influences European convention movement to this goal. The European Commission on many occasions has emphasized that European Green Deal goal climate neutrality in 2050 remains in force. At the moment, we are also assessing 2030, the so-called Paris emission reduction goals, and we are also assessing whether Europe would not be able to move faster. That means that instead of 40% reduction, that would be 50-55% reduction if we talk about the emissions. And it's obvious that this European Green Deal will require extremely significant financial resources, and the Paris goals will need about 260 billion investments per year. That if we talk about European Union, if we are more ambitious with these climate goals, these sums are going to be even bigger. Hence, we have allocated certain resources from European Union budget goals, and we're also working with the so-called with the green finances or funding, also to allocate finances from the private sector for these goals. Mrs. Garkaln already mentioned that Latvia will have 4.4 billion euros in the coming 7 years, both from the European Union budget and also from the instrument of economic recovery. And it's essential to emphasize that 30% of this sum must be allocated to the solution of the issues concerning the climate change, and that is even more ambitious aim, as initially was offered by European Commission. European Commission's offer was 25%, and the member states, when in July we came to agreement, we agreed about 30%, and which is very clear indication that also from European member states, European Green Deal remains in force, and the member states are ready to invest very considerable resources and also in order to achieve these goals. Thank you, Mr. Dombrovskis. Mr. Pūce, what are the main priorities of Latvian policy and strategy? If we look at the green, the goal of the Green Deal, the European investments, why we do that? Because last year, in 2019, among EU member states, almost complete political agreement was achieved that European Union is going to move towards climate neutrality, and Latvia was also a very significant part in this process. In fact, last year, after the initiative of the government, we were included in those ambitious member states who insisted about the necessity of adopting these goals. Why is it so important? It's obvious that all people, both in Latvia and also in European Union, that sooner or later will have to adopt this decision. That will be necessary. If in timely fashion the governments are able to agree that there's a final or certain time, like 30 years from now on, when we have to achieve these goals, that is going to stimulate both the governments and also the private sector to plan the investments much more precisely, adapting themselves to this time frame. Now, the next step, I'm very happy that von der Leyen's Commission came with this ambitious proposal about the Green Deal, because the time frame was also offering the proposals of the legislative acts, and Mr. Dombrovskis already emphasized that because there's an agreement on climate law in 2030, and again the government of Latvia is among the 8 countries group, and that supports this position. This year the Parliament Commission of Latvia agreed to that, and we want to achieve 55% reduction of this, and that means that it gives the possibility for economies to adapt. And we've been talking in the Cabinet of Ministers in Latvian parliamentary commissions, also in the European Commission. We have to stop perceive the climate goals to see it as a Procrustean bed. That's not a wooden box into which we have to squeeze. That is strategy of growth. That's a story about how European economy and also at the same time the Latvian economy could continue growing, not impacting, influencing the climate. And we have such a possibility. We see already now new technologies are being created, new approaches are being created for organizing the process. We work more efficiently, with more sustainably, with less impact upon the environment, creating services and goods which are important for people. But to achieve this goal, and this is going to be very much in attention and the focus of the government of Latvia, is the people get involved in this process. They understand why, and in the individual person in Latvia, it is important. That's our possibility. The previous goal goal of the European Union in order to achieve Paris Agreement. There was only 6% agreement reduction concerning this Paris Agreement. Now this goal means that we have to do more, and we're also such an economy structure that already now has learned to create, to produce more without increasing the CO2 emissions, and we have to create more. We have to be economically competitive. If we do that, then the Green Deal is not only going to be a story that Europe will be more climate responsible. It's our responsibility is that we deal with this most significant problem that the humanity is confronting, which is also at the same time the possibility of Latvia to convergence of income in European Union to be among the most wealthy European and world countries. So that means that we can be among these countries, but the business environment is very important. What are the possibilities that we see in the Green Deal? And that certainly goes in context for the companies, it's recovery of the companies after the COVID crisis.
So we would like to ask again, is this course really, is this deal going to make us more competitive? If we are going to eat porridge with a golden spoon, we can do that, of course, but is that reasonable? And therefore, I call this a shift, a change of views and behaviors, but it will take time. We must be sure that we are doing the right things in the right order, with the right means. Of course, we have a lot of concerns, a lot of questions, but globally no one is questioning whether we need this. The question is how to reach the goal, and there are many participants in this competition, but we are all together in a mutually linked vessel, and looking toward this positive goal, we don't want to be those who are taking on all the burden and taking on all the responsibility. So this is the other side of the coin, and there are many things which are not clear to us. So this is why we are having this discussion today, to make sure that our viewers, our audience, get a clearer vision of the future of our state. And I asked you to participate in this discussion for this reason. Many people would like to know where we are now, how green our economic system is presently before we start thinking about the future. And if we are thinking about the sustainable finance, what does this mean from the perspective of the Bank of Latvia? Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I have a very similar view of this question to Mr. Pūce's. For Latvia, as well as for the EU, this new deal is an opportunity to reach the next level and to be better prepared for our future and for the future challenges. And I would look at this more broadly. This is getting ready for the future. And looking at the situation of Latvia, I would like to emphasize two things. Juxtaposing, putting together the story of COVID and the green story, Latvia is in a rather pleasant situation. As for COVID, we have not suffered very much. We have overcome the crisis in a milder way than the average of countries. And the climate change has not made a radical impact on our economy either. So we have time to prepare. The starting position for Latvia is very good. So the economy is doing well, there are no bubbles presently, and we can invest money in the future instead of addressing some burning issues today. On the other hand, thinking of the green economy proposal, whether Latvia can follow this, Latvia simply has to do it. It's a global trend, and if Latvia doesn't participate in it, we will turn out losers in long-term perspective. And if we join early, we might happen to be in the leading group, and that would be very positive for us. But we must analyze for ourselves what this being green means, and how to combine this with the idea of sustainability. This is more than just those green things, green initiatives that we already have. In my opinion, it also means making good decisions with foresight. But we must define for ourselves what we understand as green and in which areas we specialized. Green energy means more than one thing. It would help us to reduce costs both for businesses and for households, but it would be even better not only to reduce costs but also to earn money. So we must identify our strengths and see how we can reduce costs. From the financial perspective, from the perspective of financial stability, presently the risks are relatively low. But in the future, the situation might change, and therefore we must monitor the risks. We must see what is happening, and energy efficiency is one of the issues. This is also related to crediting of various industrial sectors to make sure that they are compatible with this green economy idea. And from a wider perspective, from the position of the monetary policy, again, we have to take into consideration a number of aspects. And this is also important in the framework of the European Central Bank. Speaking the language of economy, what you buy is what you support. And another very important discussion which is taking place on the level of European central banks is concerning the investment portfolio, making decisions in which areas we are going to invest, which portfolio of bonds or securities we are going to buy. And then in long-term perspective, this is also a quality question, other questions that come into play. At present, unfortunately, all this is only at initial stages. All these areas have not developed sufficiently, and there is a much smaller offer of financial instruments than there is a demand. The demand is much higher. I see the following risk. That no one has really understood what being green is going to mean, and therefore there is a lot of hype surrounding it. It's trendy, it's cool, let's go ahead. But a lot of it is not going to be implemented. And the difficult thing is for the companies to understand what we are going to do, what will be our specialization. But the trend is obvious that we must be ready as soon as possible. And the question, in fact, is as follows. In my ministry, we also think about the Green Deal, and we are thinking about it in terms of what we will do more and what we will do less. We will try to use less energy, we will try to pollute less, we'll try to create less waste. It means that it puts some restrictions on us, but on the other hand, if we reverse this, then this is also an opportunity for Latvia. This is an opportunity for the companies who are creating products and services Many companies are already doing this. For instance, there are companies which specialize in providing insulation for buildings. There are companies which produce building materials, and this is their specialization, but they are also part of the Green Deal. They have become elements of this process. Another question is, what can we offer to the entire market of the EU and our actual economy and financial economy in Latvia? And particularly major players in the market are conscious of the new trends, and we can feel it. 5 or 6 years ago, a discussion about green financing in the banking sector sounded like discussing some cherry on top of the cake, something inessential. But presently, this has become a major topic where everyone is interested. Obviously, in this aspect, we will experience major changes. The financial sector will take part in these changes. I can feel it. And there are also actual examples in the economy of Latvia presently who are producing green products. Presently, we have companies producing goods which replace oil products, and we must continue this process. I would like to follow up on Martin's idea about the stimuli. In order for the boat to swim, to go ahead, we need wind in the sails. And it is important to prepare the stimuli presently to create the wind that is needed to avoid subsequent reproaches, complaints that someone had a hard time to join the New Deal. From the business perspective, we are looking broadly, but also individually at each business. We always want to see the return on investment. And if we have a noble goal, which we wish as a society, but we must not forget about calculating the return of investment. And then also we are concerned about fair redistribution of the GDP. This is important to maintain balance in the economy. We have seen situations when one sector runs ahead and the others are not able to catch up, and that produces this balance. Our economist experts must make an effort to make a model which would ensure that we are able to maintain our lofty goal, but at the same time would not destroy the balance in the economy. This must be kept in mind. If we still have the time, I don't know the time frames that we have, we have to consider everything together, the right stimuli, tax policy, financing policy. Attitude and behavior is another thing, but we have considerably discussed this elsewhere. That presently everyone has to ask themselves, what have you done to create the wind that would blow in the sails of this boat, to create a greener environment, so we could be in the same boat with rich countries and to create an added value for our citizens. Yes, we must keep in mind the various levels of responsibility on the state level, national level, and individual responsibility. But in your view, what are those main principles that must be kept in mind to provide for wise investment? Mr. Dombrovskis? So, as we already mentioned, on the EU and on the Latvian level, considerable financial means have become available. On the EU level, it is the budget of the following period, which is several billion euros, and it is important to make sure that this money is wisely used and invested. Therefore, we are working with the member states. The money will be available from the January of next year, and we are working with the member states on the programming of the classic EU funds, as well as with the new program documents, such as the national economic development plans, where we have to implement the element to make sure that the financing is used according to the EU policy, that it is used to implement the green transformation in the economy, keeping in mind the priority of all the member states, or each member state separately. I would like to emphasize a few things which will be relevant for Latvia as well. On the EU level, we are thinking on the transition to the green economy. There are many elements, such as the Battery Alliance, which is working on the development of electric batteries. Presently, a Clean Hydrogen Alliance is created, and they will work on the hydrogen energy development. There's also an alliance in the IT area. And in Latvia, working on all these plans, it would be important to assess in what ways the Latvian companies, the Latvian scientists could take part in these EU projects, and to work on achieving the overall EU goals and also contribute to the Latvian economy. Comments on Mr. Dombrovskis' remarks? I believe that this is a very important thing. And we all must think on this very actively together. The structure of economy in Latvia is such that we have numerous small companies with high added value. There is a high employment rate. However, it is clear that there is a technological breakthrough which is taking place presently in a number of areas, which will change the transport, the agriculture. It will make them much greener than they had ever been before. And the question is whether we will be able to develop our economy not only as buyers of services, but can we also create an economy which creates technological solutions? This is our challenge in the Green Deal. Since being accessed to the EU, many positive decisions for Latvia have been made. We have already exceeded the average indicators in the EU in many areas over these years. However, to advance in our economy, we cannot merely be those who accept technologies created in other countries. In a normal technological process, without an industrial revolution which will be offered by the Green Deal, by the new transformations, we will never succeed. Other countries will always be ahead of us. Now the new technologies are being developed, and this is our chance for getting ahead, for making a breakthrough. And we must collaborate with the financial sector, with the actual economy, with the research institutions to create conditions for this breakthrough. And how much time we have? Very short time. We must do most of the work during the next 6 months. Well, it is impossible to establish the precise time frame needed for the development of each particular technology, but we must understand some general things. If the Latvian Research Society is not able to participate in this process, they do not have the know-how, then Latvia has to choose an alternative, use other science community, because we will need science, and this will be very sad. If Latvia's actual economy is not able to participate in this, we will have to import technologies from elsewhere and again rely on consumers' approach. And if the Latvian finance sector is not able to participate, then we'll have to look for financing somewhere else. And we will have to be much more flexible than ever before.
And we have coordinated this process, and we're always doing it together with our social partners, and we've been part of this process, and that's very important that we're all together. That means that we want to work, elaborate it, and I do hope really that by not using this opportunity would be very wrong. That means that we would be doomed. I don't want to be conceited, but then we might have Portugal or Greece scenario. They converged very quickly and they reached a certain level and they stopped all of a sudden. But this is an opportunity that we have to use, and we're also very happy that this process is as it is, that COVID on the one hand helps and doesn't help this process, and helps in the sense that we can concentrate the resources and feel that we have to invest in economy more, but also on the other hand, decision making in European Union in October, we have environmental ministers to meet in order to take a decision about these 2030 goals. I hope that we will be able to adopt this decision, and that's going to be night meetings. And there's one thing I wanted to add. I think that a very large scope is being outlined. That is a possibility, an opportunity. If we miss it at the moment, now being in a relatively good position afterwards to recover is going to be very expensive and very difficult for us. And at this moment, we have to use it. But we have to also understand that we have to take painful decisions. That we cannot help that. Yes, okay, we have more money, and if we had the story in separate occasions, we've got ideas but no money, and now we've got money, and the necessity is there, the opportunity is there, and then there has to be implemented on separate occasions. It will mean painful decisions for certain groups of society. If we talk specifically about the scientific element, if these scientists participate or someone else comes with them, the educational system has to be able to adapt and so on. The inhabitants have to move along with their skills. If they don't have these skills, then we will not be able to use these opportunities. One of the reproaches in this situation is that there's a dialogue missing between the entrepreneurs, scientists, and states. And the state, or these three parties, is there something that has to be improved in this dialogue so that these available investments would achieve the science? What can facilitate the dialogue? In this area, I have a bystander's view more, but I think that there's only the dialogue is one of the elements. We can talk forever and ever, and without reaching any goals and active actions, and then we will not do anything. We have to put all these things together, dialogue, but then we thought, what are we going to do after this dialogue? But talking makes no sense. Just talking makes no sense. In this context, I wanted to mention two things, and that is about the resources and if we think about the fact that we want to become much greener, efficient, and so on, then it's obvious that each sector has its own specifics, and analyzing each branch separately, sector, transport, pharmacy, food production, ICT and also the wood processing. Well, what do they need in order that they would become more green and innovative? And then certainly they need this transformative wind, and this wind is going to be in the subsequent period, the European Structural Fund resources, and there we need a dialogue in order to put everything together. And it will not be Juris Pūce or Mārtiņš. They would know what each sector needs. The sector has to define that. For many years we have not been able to deal with the problem, and maybe that's a cost of energy. And then when we put together these additional money, that is going to be the stimulus to move on. And secondly, talking about the resources have to be used wisely. Those that we have land, soil, water, and also the timber. And we have to look from the point of view of the resources so that that's economically sustainable and also wise. If we remember that harsh example, how these Dutchmen in 400 years have recovered only 5% of their land from the sea. If we say very light-mindedly that half of that is going to be untouchable area and no economic activities will be allowed there, and we have to see always to have the balance. Oh yes, certainly there are certain untouchable areas and nothing happens there, that we agree about, but in the rest of the areas we as a society we have to agree how we act and what additional value we can give to our inhabitants from this territory. And the inhabitants, it's like 100, 500 years ago, they have fed themselves and also the family using land, and that is any sector which works on the land or works with these resources, but that is also a social contract with this sector, that they do it as very conscious and very efficient manager, taking and put from it and putting something back into it. Concerning our own resources and European resources and looking at large, that is the efficiency, what it means, so that we don't have to be beggars to ask something from outside. In Latvia, half of the territory of Latvia is not protected areas, and the factor that is worthwhile looking at whether we restrict it or not. We, as a member state of EU, were co-responsible for biological diversity and maintaining natural capital. In the future, let's be honest, since 1990, big decisions that would have increased the natural capital have never been taken, and the decisions that restrict use of certain areas were all older than about 50 years, and those territories that are particularly restricted from the economic activity in Gauja National Park. Well, in many ways they can do economic activities. That does not mean that we do not have to reevaluate how we use our own natural resources to what extent they are available, but extensive natural resources will not take place. We have to rationally think about how we can which is this natural resource, how we can that is available, that we can intensify, increase its value from it, and also there are certain things that are very adoptable good for Latvia, like the Green Deal and the climate reduction activities, and we also have the wood nurseries, and Latvia geographically and climatic, by its climate, is very suitable. We could do it if we would agree about this goal. I remember very well when we were making the government. The government declaration says that the territories for the forestry cannot be reduced, restricted territories cannot be reduced, but agricultural territories have to be destroyed, because that's the only category that has not been identified in this declaration, and which means that we will have to understand how we solve the situation. And the Valdis Dombrovskis one. Yes, colleagues, I wanted to add a couple of words here. Because at the moment we are talking about a very essential topic. When we look at the common goals, climate goals of EU, how to achieve them, what is obvious that separate sectors will have to be in general absorbing CO2 absorbing sectors, and here we're talking about such sectors as forestry, wood processing, and if we look at the territory of Latvia, it's covered largely by forest, and such territories as wood, using wood for building. That means that we are removing CO2 from atmosphere. Then if we are using wood for the building, that means that CO2 does not get into the atmosphere. The Nordic countries are working very much in this area, and Latvia has to also assess these wood building standards. And if we speak about the housing policy of wood, we call it renovation wave, because the largest emission amount is created by the domestic sector, that is heating, and there are also some countries where the cooling is a very essential issue. And that means that we have to make the housing more energy efficient, and we have to increase better standards for the new buildings, and also insulation of the old buildings. And we have to going to work very seriously with this work. And Riga City Council has a new coalition now, and if we look at the situation in Latvia now, then Riga is the largest city in Latvia, but it's in the fourth place after Latvia, Liepa, Daugavpils, and Liepa and Ventspils. So that we have to. There's a very big potential in this housing sector for reducing the CO2.
So these are the opportunities that we have been discussing in Latvia for many years. It's making Latvia green in various aspects, making the taxes greener, making the sectors greener, and the idea that we must build from wood and use wood more. And presently, our construction industry has demonstrated what it can do and what it has done in Norway and other countries. We must admit that this topic from political announcement has quickly reached the stage of the issues of technical standardization. And I have discussed this with my colleagues that presently in Latvia, when we are making a decision about building a new house, a new building, then we can make a decision to build a passive house. In Latvia, the state must show the example for others. Only a few countries are working in this way. But with our timber industry, construction industry, we could train these industries to gain advantages. Of course, in policy, these decisions are not easy to make. When we speak about energy efficient housing, in the background we always think about stimuli, how we are going to stimulate people, how we are going to pay people to insulate their houses. But at some point, we must start the discussion about the negative stimuli, about how we are going to punish those who do not comply. And these are harder questions to address, but all the citizens must be forced to participate in this program. However, this cannot be achieved only by using positive stimuli. Another example is the tax of using vehicles. Latvia is a country which imports oil products, and it has no economic interest to stimulate purchasing of vehicles with engines above 3 liters. It is senseless, absurd, it produces CO2 emissions, and besides, we are stimulating oil imports for countries of which most are not friendly to Latvia. Perhaps we must say that, hello, the time has come when a vehicle with a 2-liter engine is forceful enough, and those large cars with 3-liter engines is a thing of the past. And some may not like it, but people will have to get used to it. We are a society who likes to drive fast, but faster drivers consume more energy. And without negative stimuli, without expensive gasolines, this cannot be solved. We could also think of creating a CO2 tax on the border. Yes, it's an important, very important question. We must not allow producers and technologies from outside the EU market to win in the competition to win our local producers and companies. Indeed, this is part of the European Green Deal, and the Commission is presently preparing the proposal about the emission tax concerning the external borders of the EU. It must be also emphasized that this proposal comes in a package with another one, with another proposal. We cannot address the problem of CO2 emissions. So the discussion is as follows. If we raise the standards, then the production will take place outside the EU, and the EU will have to import this. Either it will be production of cement or steel. These are two examples from classic industries. Presently, it is partly solved by free emission quotas. Energy consuming industries have quotas of emissions, and that provides for international competition. And if we impose an emission tax on the border, we cannot maintain free of charge quotas at the same time. And therefore, we must expect that the tax will also come in a package with reduction of the free emissions. I would like to briefly discuss the financing available and the opportunities for Latvia. Many people question whether the amount is large, about more than 10 billion to be used in 7 years for Latvia. Is Latvia going to be able strategically to do this? I very much hope that yes. Of course, one can always do better, but presently we are facing this dilemma. We have the money and what to do with this money. The state sector and the private sector and each individual must understand what they can do. But I cannot answer your question in detail. I don't know. This will be more an indicator of the society growing up. So there is a time frame for doing this, and that generates additional stress. But what you understand by a recovery of the economy If we consider the COVID economic crisis or crisis caused by COVID, then the economy in Latvia has been climbing out of this crisis for several months already. If we think in long term, then are fluctuations which are uneven, but they are uneven by sector. In some sectors, we have reached pre-crisis level and exceeded it. In some other sectors, we are not going to experience a substantial progress in foreseeable future. It depends on a number of elements, but Latvia is in a comparatively good situation. Our economy has started recovery, and the recovery hopefully will progress. It will continue unless something very unexpected happens related to COVID or something else. Then the expected growth is 5 to 6%. It is very good. And this allows us to focus on long-term issues. We do not have emergencies that we would have to address immediately. There are some niche problems, but in general, we do have the time to look forward sustainably to long-term problems, and we must use this. Mr. Dombrovskis, you are overseeing two areas, the green and digital transition. And what do companies and consumers have to bear in mind in relation to this? Considering well, the green and digital transformation of the economy. With regard to the European Green Deal, we have already discussed the issues concerning and identified the priorities that we must work on. As to the digital transformation of the economy, certainly it is mostly related to the development of IT technologies. Presently, the question in focus is developing 5G communications in the EU territories, and there are also areas related to the development of science, artificial intellect, and development of computers. In this respect, there is a work being done in various aspects. But for the EU in total and for Latvia specifically, the problem that persists is the shortage of IT specialists, IT experts. And looking at the system of education in Latvia, Latvia is preparing insufficient number of specialists in the so-called STEM specialities. Latvia provides for less than 1/4 of the number of specialists needed, and we must think of how to develop the experts in the areas where experts will be most needed in the future. In the EU, we are addressing these issues. We have developed the so-called strategy of European skills, but Latvia also has large work to do considering the skills, identifying the skills for the digital economy, and also the steps to be made to achieve them. So Mr. Dombrovskis mentioned the transformation of skills. Perhaps we should also think of some other measures to overcome the relatively high unemployment rate in Latvia, which is presently higher than the average in the EU. And then another aspect which has been just added is the vision of the youth for the future, to make sure that they find their place in this future world which we are discussing now. Well, it has also been mentioned that with regard to the digital transformations, the shortage of digital skills is one problem which has been underestimated so far. We have a wide understanding of digital skills. One of the challenges is that part of the society lacks basic digital skills, which prevents them from accessing public services most effectively. And in the future, it will even more prevent the integration of the people in the overall processes. There is specific group which has particular problems, and we must think of how to help this group using some of the EU financing for this. But this is also an enormous responsibility for the system of education, not only for the formal system of education, but also for the adult education system in Latvia. How people who are 50, 60-year-old could learn the skills that they lack. Another problem is the shortage of highly skilled specialists. We are not unique in this respect. The EU has this problem in general and are trying to struggle or trying to overcome it. The question is what to do in Latvia about this. On the one hand, our higher education sector is able to be competitive and to offer good career choices for the young people, but the other aspect is the secondary education level to make sure that the young people are more purposefully guided so that they could acquire skills and professions that they will need in the future. Some work has been done in this respect, but still a lot of problems have to be addressed. The main challenge in our system of education still is the schools where the number of teachers and technical staff exceeds the number of students. There are teachers in the countryside who have diminished, reduced workload and very low earnings due to this, earning 200 to 300 euros per month. We don't have much time to solve these problems. In fact, we only have 2 or 3 years to make the important decisions. Of course, the implementation takes longer, but it is important to make the decisions. And another very important aspect is how we motivate the employers to promote the further education of their employees. And we need a tax policy which would support this, and so far we haven't been able to create such a policy. And we also have to think of additional stimuli, something that employers will receive if they educate their staff. And with time, the industry may learn to do this and be able to do this. And the last issue, which is particularly acute for Latvia, all the EU member states keep the borders open to immigrant workforce, and I hope that Latvia will do the same, because we will not be able to produce so many experts that we need, and we will not be able to do without the specialists from the third countries.
I think in this context, on the one hand, we have young people who are learning, studying, and they create the innovations that will be needed for this Green Deal, because without knowledgeable youth, the future is not going to be rosy. No, what is to be done with existing people who are already in the labor market? There's the beautiful word phrase lifelong learning, and but we don't always understand what it means. But the employer, in fact, demotivates. It's very easy to send the employee to some course, and if employer will send you to get a bachelor's or MA degree, then that means that you have to pay all the taxes, and that is different already. On the third, from the third side, we have also outstanding examples in the Nordic region when the sectors are creating the skills funds. And the skills funds is a kind of accumulating important activity that says the sector is taking care about the human capital that they have, and they themselves know how many they need, what they need, and they mobilize those who are teaching or who are learning, and this is a sort of self-organizing process and expression of democracy. The question is how to stimulate it by the state, that when at the moment if such funds are created in the sectors, well, at least in the Nordic countries, the experience is at 0.00% if you pay into this skills fund, that is not taxed. That does not have taxes. And that means the structure is taking responsibility also for the lifelong learning. My colleague mentioned very good things, but there's one thing that I would like to add concerning school. COVID very well demonstrated a whole number of opportunities that all of a sudden, within 1 month or 2 months, we were ready to use it. And that is the remote studies. And if the kid, the student at school, is not able to provide such quality, there's a series that we can do with the best examples from other schools. And that is also availability of learning, and all of a sudden, Varakļāni, a child can get the third class best results. And I would add another thing about the time frame. Now, I will be looking from a very narrow point of view as an institution from our own experience. At the end of last year, this beginning of the remote working, and then we had a discussion. Opportunities are there, wonderful. We will try to use, and but that is a matter of years, 2 or 3 years. In March, after a week, 95% of the employees are working remotely, and that means that many things happen very quickly. The speed is enormous, and you can kind of daydream. And then the positions are lost, and there's no time. We simply have to do, and we have to try it, and we hope that we manage. And you also mentioned the unemployment factor, which is a painful issue. University of Latvia also reacted very quickly. They offer the distant learning courses if you are without a job at the moment, and in fact at home you're able to acquire an important subject and get even a certificate for that. As for the school issue that I started and Martin continued, I think one important thing is that we have to be aware. Sometimes we perceive this issue as something totally insolvable question, but it is not so. Jan Sata had analysis study in Bauskano and Smiltene. It's possible to build an education network even in a remotely poorly inhabited area with low density of area where no child has to go to school further than for 22 kilometers, and this distance has to be covered only by the students, 7th and 12th formers, and then they would have the salary above 700, and they would be able to provide that in the secondary school. A child does not have only two possibilities, and because there will be in-depth compulsory or mandatory studies or courses, you will be able to choose from all the blocks or courses, subjects, and that means that all schools can provide that they have the STEM block. If we don't do it, then in Latvia, half of the secondary school, they will not be able to choose STEM for the in-depth study. And therefore, we have to take this step. We must do it. And what I feel also, last year I had an opportunity to be in all parts of the country, not in the best sort of discussions, but pleasant discussions. But this is a topic who are aggressively counter-react. In these remote regions, the inhabitants are aware that this step has to be taken. Well, thank God that the people start looking further into the future. If we're not be able to give adequate education and skills to the kids, then we will doom them to the poverty, and that is certainly not acceptable. Continuing this topic and also talking more broadly about the topic that we touched upon at the beginning of this discussion, and that is the investment in climate area and also competitiveness of Latvia. And here again, I would like to ask Mr. Dombrovskis, what does Latvian competitiveness, competitive skill ability looks like, and how we can increase it, and what is a prerequisite that this would happen? If we talk about Latvia's competitiveness, in fact, that is a very complex issue. In our time, we started in Latvia regular reports on Latvia's competitiveness, and we also have the Latvian Productivity Council that is systematically working. And it is not so that there's no one single solution that would define the competitiveness of Latvia. In fact, competitiveness is very much connected with the productivity of the economy, to what extent our economy is able to produce, and that determines very much the rate of our salaries. And this is defined by many things that are the physical investments and also the skills of the employees, and also the availability of the infrastructures and the support that can be provided by the scientific innovation in Latvia, how we are using the investment funding from the EU. There are very many factors. We cannot say that there is just one issue that is going to influence Latvia's competitiveness. There are a couple of things that we have to do. We certainly have to increase the value-added tax in many sectors. We touched upon the timber industry, and there's one situation if we just export logs, and if we export certain constructions that have very high added value, and this trend has to be supported. And we are talking here about, we have to talk about here about all the traditional sectors in Latvia, and there's an issue that we mentioned. And if Latvia jumps into the green and transformation train, I don't think Latvia is going to decide by itself how Latvia's digital and green transformation is going to take place. The question is whether Latvia will be able to take part in the initiatives that take place in the international scale and also in Europe, and whether Latvia will be able to contribute and also facilitate the economy of Latvia. I think we are discussing about in what way, how we are going to acquire these resources that Latvia will have in the coming 7 years, and we have to think about those. Now that is then increasing the VAT in the traditional sectors, and how Latvia is getting involved in the European initiatives that are connected with digital and green deal, and how we connect the educational system in Latvia with demand from the labor market. Thank you very much. Mr. Pūce, what do you think? Do you think these are going to be the biggest challenges in order to increase Latvia's competitiveness competitiveness. Well, certainly we can look at that from different perspectives, but the competitiveness of Latvia, its increase is a consistent task of the government, and we need to prepare plans that makes even us to ask harsher questions. What is going to ensure this growth relatively in a short period of time, in 3 and 4 years, that it is going to be bypassing other economies? What are these activities? What are these? Well, maybe if we don't do, well, there's a kind of an effect, a bumping off effect. But can we do more in order to stimulate and to ensure that? And here we must ask also the question about, and that is going to be a very important issue, with such a high degree of unclarity that is in international service and commodity markets, the investors are going to be very cautious. I cannot reproach them. If I have to risk with my money here, I would be very cautious myself, because economy in general, that is risky trend. That is resulting in a non-growing economy, and the question is how we're going to stimulate the private investments so that they might become more competitive in the future. That is a big theme. The instruments are being created during COVID. That is stimulating it, and we also can see the data how this program is acquired, implemented. I could say it could be done better. This topic is indeed very large. I wanted to add, this topic was a question not only for Mr. Pūce, but for others about the error mistake. The admission of error in this Green Deal. Also, green bubbles are also breaking. Life is life. We talk about innovation. We try. As society, we are risking taking chances on separate occasions. We undertake this risk, and that has been certainly calculated. We must have this culture that can also make mistakes. If we want to invent something new, certainly there's a certain risk to be in error. To be mistaken, and we shouldn't think that we are going to be absolutely perfect. We don't have to be perfect. It would be better than we would be better than somebody who is behind us. Innovation is that thing where you have to make mistakes, and you do make, and it's a huge role played by the state here, because the state defines the environment in very many occasions, and companies that are owned by the state, they also define the rules of the game. And from the side of the state, well, under certain conditions, these mistakes could not be deliberate and conscious, but they can exist. So we get to the innovations.
Many of the state companies, large companies, are like an anchor in their sector. When the sector is swaying to the right or to the left, then these large companies help to restore the balance, to keep them straight. And many things depend on these large companies, about their vision, on their vision of things. Other companies in the sector depend on that, and these large companies can make the decisions, main decisions in innovation area, and of course they are capable of making mistakes too, and it depends whether state audit will accept that and be happy about that, but that's a different issue. And with regard to innovations, we all have our historical memory, and having information has a bad side effect, which is that it makes people cautious. And remembering the bad things concerning innovations no one wants to create OIC2, another bad example, but at the same time, we must know very well the potential of our economy and not waste time on in areas which we have no potential in. Considering the society in Latvia, a very important thing is to be aware of the possibility of making a mistake, doing anything. And it is not something condemnable. We have to learn lessons from it, from our mistakes. But we have a society which doesn't accept mistakes well. I will mention just one area where trial is very important. In the circular economy idea, for example, we have to implement this idea. For example, in producing new materials for road building, we must try various materials, standardize them for the use in Latvia. Perhaps we must consciously make the decision that 1% of all this work will be just experimental. Scientists will have to try and pilot using certain materials on some roads to make sure if they are this material is efficient, and the error may be higher, even 20% or more. But we must be able to accept that we will then reject the bad ideas and keep the ones which are viable. We must adopt a different model of thinking. The state company Latvenergo, the main producer of electricity, and we must allow them to test new technologies of producing electricity. They should try it. In Denmark, a similar company is one of the most innovative companies in the world, and they try all kinds of things. Of course, not large-scale experiments with 100 megawatts, but they start on small scale, and they reject every third technology that they test. They just find that it is not efficient enough, but then two other technologies turn out to be effective. And in Latvia, we cannot do this on larger scale, but certainly we can do that on national level for our own economy. Mr. Dombrovskis? To a large extent, I agree with our colleagues' view concerning the relations of science and innovations. It is clear that green transformations will mean large investments in science and innovations, and experimentation will have to be increased. But there is another painful issue for Latvia. If we consider Latvia's contributions to science and innovation, then they are among the lowest in the EU. And, the European Commission provides annual recommendations, and Latvia is always called to invest more in science, in collaboration of science with companies, and this is one area where Latvia has to make an effort to improve. If with regard to science and innovations, Latvia will have one of the lowest indicators in the EU levels, and it will be difficult to attract further funding to science. I would like to add one more thing that is needed for the Latvian economy to make this breakthrough. Looking from the perspective of the society, from a broader perspective, in COVID time, everyone is called to wash hands, then I would also say that this is what the economy of Latvia needs. Wash your hands and try to avoid COVID. And looking at each individual person, then we must emphasize the need of skills. It's skill, skill, and skill again. So that the person would be able to participate in the process. The skills can be built by the person themselves or provided by the state. We are a small economy, but we must only be smart enough to use the EU money which is presently available. But as a society, we must be able to collaborate. If we are not able to collaborate inside, among ourselves, and outside, we will not be effective. For small societies, it is critically important to be able to collaborate. So we have to collaborate with science, with education. And we cannot just rely on the scientists in Latvia for all the solutions. Our scientists need global competition, global competitiveness, and that means that they need global skills. In many areas, as a society, we are still very secluded. We think that we will be able to solve our own problems, but it will never happen. As a society, we would be winners if we opened ourselves up more, if we could learn from others. And in some cases, it means also attracting people from other areas of life, other professions, which makes us stronger. If we want to be globally doing well, we need global skills. We cannot learn them locally. Continuing this discussion, we have also received a number of questions. I would like to ask them to the participants. Do you know that this will also mean new taxes and new restrictions? Could you outline the actual situation? Indeed, there will be positive and negative stimuli in place to achieve the effect. Certain stimuli will have to be provided, but also we will need a whip. Looking at making our tax policy green or making various regulations greener, in many sectors it is already happening without external regulations. Any company which is developing is buying new equipment, and it is always more efficient, greener, and so on. But there are areas where this process has to be stimulated. For example, the housing segment is the segment where the changes are the slowest, and to stimulate the changes there, obviously will take both the use of positive and negative stimuli. Something must change. In the Confederation of Employers a few days ago, we had a discussion about packaging, how we are going to refuse from packaging which cannot be recycled, and presently there is a large amount of such packaging. It is not an easy step. In many cases there is no alternative, but we must find a solution. But there are areas where there are some stimuli in taxes or otherwise which promote the companies to adopt new greener packaging. The policy is only half of the solution to the problem. Another aspect of this is that every new problem also is an opportunity. How the question is how we as a humanity are going to cope with the climate change if we are not ready to change anything in the tax policy, for example. What is our plan? To watch how the world the earth is getting warmer and warmer, and how we are approaching a catastrophe. No, this is not our plan. Our plan is to help the humanity to cope with this problem, as well as to gain as a country, and this is a growth strategy which is plausible. Yes, we are all in the same boat and we understand this, but at the same time, the key words are balance and continuous control of costs. And if one component becomes more expensive, then another component has to be reduced in cost, so that in total, the production cost, which is one of the indicators of production, this production cost must not kill our competitiveness regionally. So I would like to propose this model of balance, and the new deal will ask for a new balance model, and we must think of what we have to give up to compensate for certain increase in costs. In the next 20, 30 years, we will have to get used to drinking wine from bottles which are not made of glass, as glass is very difficult to recycle. It consumes a lot of energy, and our future is Tetra Paks from cardboard. Packaging made from timber, from wood pulp, is very energy efficient. In the 70s, an Arabic sheikh said that the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones. And we are in a similar situation with regard to energy efficiency, with the understanding of green economy, what we can afford as a society, what we can't afford, how we devour the resources of the earth. Many things have already become extinct and they are not going to return. Mr. Dombrovskis? I would like to add a few sentences on this topic. First of all, if we look globally, when we were preparing the European Green Deal, we made an assessment of the impact on the economies, and our conclusion was that this will give a small positive effect on the economic growth and on employment. Yes, some jobs will become extinct, but the green economy will create many new jobs. So in total, we could say that by implementing the Green Deal, the society can become more prosperous. The question is how correctly we can manage this transition. And then we can think of new taxes and restrictions. And together with Mrs. Meņģelsone and Mr. Kazāks, we had another discussion on the fiscal policy in the festival Lampa, and presently the trend is to decrease the taxes of the workforce, particularly low-paid workforce, but the tax has to be transferred to some other area, and the green taxes will be bases which can absorb the taxes from the workforce. We already mentioned the tax or duty which could be paid on the external border of the EU, the tax on fossil fuel. We presently are thinking of an increased tax on plastic packaging and plastic waste. In cities, certain emission zones can be introduced with regard to green housing. Certain restrictions on the use of plastic packaging can be introduced. We must count on that. but certainly in total, the green economy will have a positive impact.
Try to sort the waste, and then you will see how much you, you're creating waste. And if we look at the sociology data, the society has become much more educated in this area. 10 years ago, the women, the most educated women were men above 40 and then above 40. At least, and imagine that you have a plastic mountain. Yes, unfortunately, I'm not trying to buy a plastic. Do you have some time yet? We have certainly a comment and who are getting involved and active in this society because society's activity is very important in the subsequent process. There's a comment, Maria writes, that with energo efficiency, we have to look additionally also what sort of material are used for insulation, paying attention not only to the value of the materials but also the pollution of the environment in the end of the life cycle. We have our own resources. We have peat and timber. We always have those. And there's also the question, I'm sorry, can you also give another example from the fiscal policies point of view? You can look at 1 or 2 cent coins as ecology problems. In Latvia, we have 580 tons of 1 and 2 cent coins, and that has to be taken somewhere. And if we look, we get rid of 1 and 2 cent coins. That's a great gain of economy. I understand that the government of Latvia will earn more. But here's a question: why Latvian recovery plan does not include green filters? The recovery means should not be given to all the sectors because not all the sectors represent the needs of the society. It could be as the green filters could be also as a taxonomy means in order to as a basis of allocation of the resources. In September, we should have European Commission guidelines. I certainly support this. If we want to pass over to the Green Deal, then we shouldn't invest that are opposed to it. I do not see these questions like that. And that COVID stimulus money that we have invested, that is aimed at reducing the emissions instead of decreasing the emissions instead of increasing. Or certainly such considerations can exist. And in any case, we have been regular arguments about one or another investment project, whether the investment projects are suitable for the future economy, but I'm waiting for the guidelines because that's one of these vague things, how to plan it. Mr. Dombrovskis, European Commission was mentioned. As we know, in principle, we have to move onwards very quickly because agreement about the European economic recovery plan was adopted in June, and the resources are available, and that's why we ask the countries to submit the EU member states in October their recovery plans. The common principles are clear already. I'll just touch upon them very briefly. In September, mid-September, they're going to be there. That means that these resources have to be invested in correspondence to the EU priorities and the challenges that have been been identified in the EU semester, and that is where we coordinated fiscal policies of EU. And as I said, we have this 30% goal that 30% of all the resources have to be allocated to the solution of the climate change. And if we talk about specifically about the sustainability instrument of the economy recovery, it's going to be defined within the framework of 37%. Now, preparing this plan, you can already take that into account. Thank you very much, Mr. Dombrovskis, for the comment. Anyhow, giving the right signal, the right direction, very many sectors have already got more active, and also the food producers and retailers. They're creating the idea about a large packaging recycling factory, so that we could do to the last detail here. And also in the timber industry, they have the project ready so that the wood should be used entirely. And I think these are very good changes that are taking now. We're certainly all for good changes in the future as well, and I would like to thank all the participants of the discussion, the European the Commission Vice President Mr. Dombrovskis. Have a good night in Brussels after long discussions. Environmental and Regional Development Minister, Mr. Pūce, Mārtiņš Kazāks, the President of the Latvian Bank, and Mrs. Meņģelsone, who is the Latvian Employers Confederation. Or maybe after 10 years we're going to drink only the tap water. Well, incidentally, that is a fact. And that can be done starting from today. Yeah, in Riga they have very good quality, high quality water. So I wish to all of you a nice evening. Take a rest after long discussions, and we would like to have Mr. Pūce a good discussion in the evening in CESIS, and see you at other discussions. Thank you very much.